welcome everybody to Effective Communication Strategies for Program Management. I'm with Oracle. I'm specifically in the industry strategy group within Oracle, and I deal primarily in public sector. So this is my kind of my native ground. I deal with not only federal but also state, local levels, not only U.S. but globally as well. So I hope you get excited about what we're kind of do today. I've tried to put together a program for you that's very practical in nature. A lot of the information that we're going to go over today is battle-worn and tested type of information. There's a lot of tips in here for you. There's a lot of checklists in here for you. A lot of what I'm going to go over is actually based on PMI best practices as well, in addition to a couple of pieces that actually come from the Harvard Business Review in terms of how to communicate effectively. Okay, so hopefully we'll get you some tidbits that you can actually walk away with. Here's our agenda for what we're going to be doing. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here just talking about communication planning, not spending a lot of time in terms of putting together a communication plan, because I think most of you have probably done that. But I, once again, like to have an interactive session for you. So this is a lot of you learning together as well to see what your different agencies and bureaus are doing. And I'm, of course, here to help you intercede as well. I've been doing communications for about 20 years. And I've actually worked in a PMO office down at GSA in Washington, D.C., so I've seen things blow up and I've seen them work smoothly as well. So I kind of bring that experience to the table. There's other things we're going to go through here that you really need to consider as you're kind of going through your communication planning. Second thing is vehicles, and what exactly do those mean, and what vehicles are you using. One of the key things that the advisory board had actually wanted me to cover here dealt with executive sponsors and stakeholders, and actually how best to handle those, how to handle project opponents, because there's always that situation that everybody confronts. That's going to lead into communication strategies and styles. So you'll see that everyone kind of falls into a style group. What are some of the better communication strategies to handle, and ways to handle people from that perspective. And then lastly, we're just going to kind of close out in terms of trying to put all this stuff together. We're gonna end. That's about 30 or 40 minutes just of general comments from me. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to wave the state flag. Okay. We're going to do a communication workshop, and that's going to comprise a couple of exercises. I got to ask everybody first. I sent out a couple of emails just reminding everybody who's going to come. I gave you a lot of homework assignments, so welcome to communications, right? And your PR session. How many of you actually had an opportunity to fill out your homework assignments and actually do those ahead of time? Okay. Okay, so not too bad. So we're going to do two communication exercises. One is a specific case study. What we're going to do is break into groups of, we've got about 50 people, so we're going to break into 5 groups of 10. Okay, so we'll cover that at the end of this. And the second is actually a communication assessment, and that is an organizational assessment, and that's the one pager that's out there, and that's what these charts are along the wall. Okay, that I'll have your group fill out. So you'll see some trending here. So I'll give you an idea of how you're doing, your agency, bureau is doing versus what everybody else is doing. Okay. And lastly, if we have some time, we're going to go and take a look at a GSA case study. Okay, this is on YouTube. We're not going to look at the whole thing. It goes for around 30 minutes. But we'll go through some snippets. And the reason I brought that up was because it in fact has a lot of the key elements that I'm talking about and what GSA did to implement a very large SaaS project. Okay. So just a couple of learning objectives here in terms of getting a better sensitivity to communicating your messages and looking at in terms of who's actually receiving them. And a lot of it has to do with, I'll call it kind of an out-of-body experience. So you need to understand who your stakeholders are. The other thing is just in terms of communication planning, preparation, delivery, and feedback, is really understanding some of the key attributes on that, and really being methodical in terms of your planning. That's what really leads to strategic success in terms of executing a good communication plan for projects. And lastly, and these are some of the political lessons I'll throw in at the end, is once again trying to get something out of communicating with diverse stakeholder groups, and how to effectively do that, and how to kind of work your way through that labyrinth, which a lot of times is not a very pleasant experience, especially if you have a lot of stakeholders on its board. Okay, so we'll start off with an interesting study here. Actually, PMI did a study, their 2013 Pulse of the Profession study, which basically was studying project management. And what was interesting about this is the Pulse study revealed that one of the most critical factors in project management is actually effective communication to all stakeholders. Now, what's interesting about this chart is it reveals that of $135 million is at risk for every $1 billion of project spend, which is quite a bit. But if you think that further research on the importance of effective communication uncovers a startling fact that 56%, or about 75 million of that 135 million, is at risk due to ineffective communications for every $1 billion in spend. So, at the end of the day, communications is really important, and you need to do it effectively. There's a couple of other studies that are important. For example, Forbes Insight 2010 strategic study, adapting corporate strategy to changing economy, found that 9 out of 10 CEOs believe that communication is critical to the success of their strategic initiatives. And nearly half of those respondents cited communication as an integral and active component of the strategic planning. Okay? Now, the PMI Pulse research study further went on to say that 55% of project managers agree that effective communications to all stakeholders is critical for their success. So this is backed up once again by PwC, which did their third global CIO study and found that the current state of project management reveals that effective communications is associated with a 17% increase in finished projects within budget. Okay? So these are some good data points for you in terms of the importance of communications within the project management lifecycle. So, as we all know, not all projects succeed, and on average, 2 in 5 projects don't meet their original goals and business intent. And half of those unsuccessful projects are related to ineffective communications. And it's always funny, too, because if you look at the speakers for everybody kind of starts off with these metrics, right? So what's the relevance? But you're always starting off with project failure. It's a little depressing, but if you know what the cause is, you can certainly create a remedy to that. So results from these surveys reveal that aspects of project communications are challenging, but the 2 big problems area are a gap in understanding business benefits, and also in challenges surrounding the language that's used to share project-related information. So fundamentally, that gets down to people not articulating clearly what they're trying to get across. It seems pretty intuitive, but that's what it is. So the difficulty is certainly exacerbated behind the project manager, which a lot of times is supposed to be the communication director, and generally the lack of understanding of who their audiences are. So the question is how can you kind of rectify that? So let me ask you, in your first question for the audience, in terms of your particular organizations, how much has communication been a critical problem area within your project management activities? A lot? Mm-hmm. How about everybody else? Anybody else? Big deal? Now, have you seen a couple of areas between those 2 problem areas that I mentioned, between business benefits and language? Have you seen actually either of those 2 areas percolate to the top in terms of trying to figure out what went wrong, what went right? A little bit?